everyone, I'm Izzet, and in this video I'm going to talk about the best commons and uncommons for limited in Guilds of Ravnica. I've spent the last week or so evaluating every card in the set, and if you want to see an in-depth discussion about every card in the set before the pre-release, I would recommend watching that. However, this is sort of a Cliff's Notes for my set review, so if you don't have time to go back and watch several hours of videos, this is a good way to prepare. Commons and uncommons are of course central to success in Limited, and in this video I'm going to talk about my picks for the best ones in each color, and talk about which I would be happy first picking. Usually I only give my picks for the 3 best commons and uncommons in each color, but given the nature of Guilds of Ravnica, where there is a big focus on each of the guilds, I'm also going to give my picks for the best gold common and uncommon for each guild. Now let's get started with white. I think the third best white common is Parhelion Patrol. It's one of the very few mentors, and certainly the only one at lower rarity, that actually has flying, so it can mentor smaller creatures and stay alive. And at a base cost of 4 mana for a 2/3 with flying and vigilance, that's pretty great. If you make it bigger with other mentors, then it's going to get really nuts because it already flies and it has vigilance. Both keywords that like for the creature to be bigger, because obviously it can block more effectively if it has vigilance and it's bigger, and it attacks harder in the air. It's just a solid common. It's certainly not one you really want to be first picking, I have to say. It's not, the best common ever, but it's a good one, and it's one you'll play like 2 or 3 of in basically any white deck. Next, I have Loxodon Restorer. So these convoke creatures, the way I sort of look at them and evaluating them is I say, well, what do I have to get this to feel like I'm getting a good deal? And at 4 mana, I feel like I'm getting a good deal here, and I don't think it's absurd to think that on turn 4, you can play this guy if you've played a couple other creatures, like a 2-drop and a 3-drop, and then you're getting a pretty good deal. Gaining the life and being a decent size is a pretty nice thing to have. Even if you're paying 5 for it, you're not exactly overpaying. That's probably where you're getting like what would be realistic, and that's not hard to do either. Again, it's not a card I really want to be first picking, but it's another solid common for white. However, the best common in white is one you want to be first picking. It's one we've seen a lot of times, and that is, of course, Luminous Bonds. It's a premium removal spell. It makes creatures unable to attack or block. Has a bit of downside in that it can't shut down activated abilities, but that's really not a big deal. For 3 mana, it makes 90% of the creatures in the format irrelevant, and that's a really good deal, and it is worth first picking. Of the 3 commons, I think that's the only one you're happy to first pick, and I don't think you really ever should be first picking Loxodon Restorer or Parhelion Patrol. Next, let's look at white's uncommons. The third best uncommon in white, I think, is Inspiring Unicorn. It's a nice little creature because of the fact that both decks that are in white, the Selesnya deck and the Boros deck, are both going to be interested in pumping their whole team. It's worth noting it also pumps itself. Not all of the effects we see like this do. It's just a great little creature, and I think you do feel fine about first picking it. It's maybe not ideal, but I think it's a nice first pick. Really puts you in a good place if you're in white because it's good in both decks in the color pair. Next we have Sunhome Stalwart, which is just really good stats and a keyword ability. 2 mana 2/2s with first strike are always good. Adding Mentor to it makes it way better, and a format with Mentor in it makes it better because obviously creatures with first strike get even more intimidating than other creatures do when they get +1/+1 counters. So if it's a 3/3, it's even harder to stop, and it can also mentor more things. I think you feel pretty good about first picking it as well. The card that you definitely feel great about first picking in white is Conclave Tribunal. It is, an Oblivion Ring effect, and it can cost as little as 0 mana, and that's kind of insane. Even if it just costs 4, it would probably still be better than these other 2 cards. Costing as little as it does, it's way better than all of the other cards, and it's just a great premium removal spell that I think you first pick over like 95% of the rares in the format even. Next, let's look at blue's commons. I think the third best blue common is Dimir Informant. It has nice defensive stats, and both blue decks in this format look to be more or less interested in being defensive, and the Informant lets you do that. It surveils, so it sort of lets you dig deeper into your deck. It's sort of like Omen Speaker, which we just recently had and we've seen a few times. Except Surveil's even better than Scry in this format anyway. Plus there are Surveil payoffs and all of that. You definitely don't want to be first picking it though, I will say. It's not the best common ever, but it is blue's third best common. I think the second best common is Watcher in the Mist. It also helps you surveil, but it's much more offensive. It's evasive, and when it comes into play, that surveil trigger happens and you get to set up your future draws. It can just kill people in the air. It's got great stats and an ability. Everything together is exactly what you want for 5 mana, especially at common. I think it's like a weak first pick, but it is one that will happen sometimes, I think. And I think the best blue common is Capture's Fear, which is a nice removal spell for blue. Shuts down most things. Doesn't stop cards that have activated abilities that don't involve tapping, but it's still a really good removal spell. I don't know if I want to use the word premium to refer to it, but it's about as close as a blue removal spell can get, and I think you feel fine about first picking it. Next, let's look at blues uncommons. I think the third best blue uncommon is Murmuring Mystic, and I may be a little biased here because this is basically my favorite card in the set, I will say up front. However, I think it's just a really good card. I mean, even its base level as a 4-mana 1/5, obviously not good, but the fact that it has all the other text attached to it, in addition to being a 4-mana 1/5, which isn't completely atrocious, is pretty nice. It can block well, and it'll make an army in the sky. Works really well with Jumpstart. It's going to be at its best in the Izzet deck, but the Dimir deck's also going to be interested in playing instants and sorceries. If you can just make a couple flyers with this, you're going to be pretty happy, and if you can make a bunch, you're going to be really happy. Next is Chemister's Insight. I like this card. It draws you 2 cards twice. Granted, you have to use a card each time to draw those 2 cards, but that means it's a 2-for-1 2 times, and that's nice. It's good with cards like Murmuring Mystic and other instant and sorcery spell triggers. It's just going to be a really good card in control decks. It could definitely slip on this list if the Boros deck ends up being like the dominant deck in the format, the best deck in the format, because if it's that fast, playing something like Chemister's Insight is going to be hard to make you want to do, since it doesn't impact the board at all, it doesn't protect you, it doesn't do anything except draw you cards, but I like it to begin with. Next, I think the best blue uncommon, and one you feel good about first picking. I don't think you feel great about first picking either of these, though I could see doing either one in some weaker packs, but this one you feel good about first picking. City Watch Sphinx. It's sort of like the Watcher, except it's bigger, and it only surveils when it dies, but the fact of the matter is it's got good stats for its cost, and it does something when it gets killed, and things that can do things even if they get blown up are usually a little better than things that don't do that, because you get value out of the card anyway. Sure, Surveil 2 is like 10% of the value of a 5/4 flyer, but it's there, and you do get a little bit of value at least. Let's move to Black's Commons. I think the third best black common is Spinal Centipede. I don't recommend first picking this. I don't really think that will ever happen in this format, but the third best black common is still a pretty good card. It is a good card. It's just not, like, you know, it doesn't pull you into black, but if you're already in black, you'll be snatching these up left and right. It's sort of like the Sphinx we just looked at in that it has decent stats for its cost as a 3-mana 3/2, and it does something if it dies. And in this case, what it does is it makes one of your other creatures bigger for good with a +1/+1 counter. Pairs well with Mentor. Though it is worth noting that black-white isn't really, or black-red, neither are really supported color pairs in this format, but if you're splashing black into one of them, or you're splashing one of them into the deck, then maybe it'll work out. But it's just a good creature with a good effect. Dead Weight's really good. It's just an incredibly efficient removal spell. Kills a lot of things. If it can't kill it, it can make them irrelevant. You do feel solid about first picking Dead Weight, but the ideal first pick for a black common is Deadly Visit. A removal spell that also surveils for you is great. Sure, it costs 5 mana, and it is another card, like, if this format ends up being crazy fast, Dead Weight could actually end up being the best common. We see this happen sometimes where the really efficient removal spell instead of the catch-all removal spell becomes the better card. But that doesn't usually happen, but it could happen if this format's really fast. Some people think Boros is going to dominate the format. I think that remains to be seen. I could see a lot of different things happening here. Next, let's look at Black's uncommons. I think the third best black uncommon is Necrotic Wound. I don't love the idea of first picking it just because it's such a build-around. You have to have cards in your graveyard or it is completely dead. It's useless. Once you get 2 cards in your graveyard, it's reasonable, and after that, it starts to be great. So it has a high ceiling, but it also has a miserable floor, and for that reason, I would mostly like to avoid it. I think the second best black uncommon is Crawl Swarm. This thing just has really aggressive stats. It has high power, and having high power on a flyer is always great. High power and low toughness on a ground creature, like a 5-mana 4/1 on the ground, would of course be atrocious, but when you add evasiveness, especially flying, the best evasive ability, to a creature that has high power, it's a pretty good deal, because it represents such a fast clock for the amount of mana you spent. Additionally, it can keep coming back, and it can stock your graveyard as well for Undergrowth, though it doesn't really stock your graveyard so much as replace itself in your graveyard, but that does make sure your Undergrowth stays up. And the best black uncommon is probably the best uncommon in the entire set. I actually only think there are 9 rares and mythics that are better than it. I don't even think there are 10, so you should first pick it over almost everything in the entire set, and that is, of course, Price of Fame. 4-mana instant speed removal spell, kills things, and surveils too. If that's all it did, it would probably still be the best uncommon. Adds a little bit of extra value in that it costs less if you kill legendaries. There aren't going to be a lot of legendaries around in this format. They're all at higher rarities, but it can destroy them more cheaply, and obviously that doesn't hurt the value of a card that's already incredibly good. Now let's look at Red. I think Red's third best common is Direct Current. This is a card that encountered a lot of resistance in my set review when I said that I think it's a C+, which means it's like a reasonable playable for a red deck. It doesn't mean it's a great card or anything. A lot of people thought it was just bad in the comments section, and so I'll use this video to sort of elaborate more on why I think it's good. There are a lot of X2s in this format, for one thing, and for another thing, Yeah, it doesn't do what it does efficiently, but it does it twice. So in the late game, you can get rid of a land and use it to maybe pressure your opponent, maybe kill them, maybe get closer to killing them, or more ideally, use it to kill a creature. These jumpstart cards do not give you card advantage, except for the one that literally draws you cards, but they give you card selection. You know, they're like late game mana sinks where you can chuck a land and get an effect out of them. And that late game value, when it's attached to a card that probably killed some X2 in the early game too, and you can cast it out of your graveyard later, makes for a solid card. That said, I don't think it's first pickable. I just think it's a reasonable card. I think you're going to be happy to have 2 of these in most of your red decks. Maybe to a lesser extent if you're in Boros, but the fact that it can hit any target probably makes it attractive to Boros decks as well as Izzet decks. I think the next red common is Wojek Bodyguard. It's a very aggressive card. Obviously, it's going to find the most use in like a Boros deck. It mentors, it has high power and high toughness for its cost. It can't attack or block alone, but if you have your deck going and you're just curving out, it's going to be attacking and blocking with friends all the time. Also don't think it's ideal to first pick it, but I think it's a really good card, especially for the Boros deck. I think the best red common, and the only one in this group that I think you feel good about first picking, is Command the Storm, which can do 5 damage to a creature at instant speed. It's nothing pretty, it's not hyper efficient, but it being instant speed does make it better than like sorcery speed versions of this that we've seen in the recent past. You can get more blowouts if something's instant speed, obviously. It's a nice removal spell, kills almost all the creatures in the format for 5 mana. It is another card that could decrease in a world where this format ends up being really fast, and Direct Current could actually improve. If this format's all about the Boros deck, Direct Current can kill almost everything in that deck, except for Wojek Bodyguard here. So, you know, but I think this is most likely the way things are going to end up. Now let's move to Red's Uncommons. I think all 3 red uncommons are things you feel good about first picking. You have first up is Inescapable Blaze. Maybe not the most efficient thing ever, but it's also instant speed, and it does 6, and it can hit your opponent. Being able to hit your opponent for 6 is a significant upside to a burn spell that can already kill almost any creature. So adding that extra upside makes it so I think it's worth first picking. Next, I have Goblin Crater Maker, who's a nice creature for the cost, but also has a useful activated ability, which will usually be used to kill something, most likely, but occasionally you'll blow up a problem artifact. And the best red uncommon, and I don't think it's particularly close, is Lava Coil. I think you first pick this over all the uncommons in the set that aren't Price of Fame, so I think it's basically the second best uncommon in the set. It's incredibly strong, incredibly efficient, and it exiles things in a format where that actually matters because of things like Undergrowth. Next, let's look at green. I think green's third best common is Prey Upon. You know, this is the kind of removal spell green gets all the time. In fact, they've gotten the specific card several times. If your deck has enough like 3 power creatures in it, it gets to be pretty good, I think. It can end up being not that good if your deck doesn't have enough bigger creatures in it, but most green decks are going to have enough 3 power or more creatures in it for it to be worth it, but I don't think you want to first pick it. It's not premium removal. It's not particularly close. First, because it asks that you have a creature in play, and second, because that creature has to be big enough to kill whatever it is you want to kill of your opponents. And if they're the same size, then you have to 2-for-1 yourself. And if your opponent interacts with you when you play Prey Upon and bounces your creature or destroys it, then you're really in trouble. So it's not premium, but you'll play like 1 or 2 of these in almost all your green decks. The next best green common, I think, is Urban Utopia. So Ravnica is usually, the other 2 times we've played it, all about being able to play a lot of colors. You're obviously going to be a 2-color deck minimum, but I think 3-color decks will be just as common, and 4- and 5-color decks are going to be a thing as well, and Urban Utopia really enables that. It provides you with great fixing while also replacing itself. If it didn't replace itself, it would be a much worse card, but the fact that it replaces itself makes it pretty nice. And the fixing it gives you is incredibly relevant in a format like this one. I think maybe in like a really weak pack where everything is just sort of like shrug-worthy, maybe you just take Urban Utopia because of the fact that it does set you up to be able to take more powerful cards in the draft. And I think the best green common is Siege Worm. It's a card that has been a best or close to the best green common in a past Ravnica set, and I think it is here too. Like I said earlier, when you look at these Convoke creatures, it's useful to think about, well, when do I feel like this is a good deal? Here at 5, you're getting a really good deal, and that's not going to be that hard to do. Sometimes you can cast it for even cheaper. It's a big creature that has an evasive ability in Trample, and that's a nice thing to have at the top of your curve in basically any green deck. Next, let's look at green's uncommons. I think the third best green uncommon is Affectionate Indrik. It is a creature with an enter the battlefield fight effect. It can kill things that have, obviously enough, 4 toughness or less, and if it survives, you're getting a really good deal, and it will survive if you're using it in a good way, which is to kill like a 3-4. You get to keep the Indrik, and now you have a 2-for-1 brewing because all you have to do is use this to trade with something else. Sometimes it'll just be the biggest thing on the table after it kills something. The Indrik is nice. I think you feel okay about first picking it, but maybe not thrilled. I think green's second best uncommon is Circuitous Route. As I said earlier, talking about green's commons, being able to search your library for lands and fixing is going to be really strong in this format, and green really has the ability to do it between Circuitous Route and the common we looked at and the next uncommon we're going to look at. And it can even search up gates, which means you may get to search your library for a gate, which obviously produces 2 different colors of mana, and maybe you're getting a land that produces 2 different colors that you don't already have, and that's going to feel pretty awesome. It also ramps you at the same time. It could be a little dangerous if like your opponent's just curving out and all you've done is like cast a turn 2 ramp spell and a turn 4 ramp spell, but hopefully you've done something in between to sort of keep you alive. I think the best green common is District Guide. This card I think is a little contentious. I've seen other people in set reviews give it worse grades than I did, but I'm largely inspired by Civic Wayfinder from original Ravnica, which was basically the same card, except it was common, and it couldn't search for gates. Gates didn't exist in original Ravnica anyway. And it was a great card because of the fixing it provided you. It's basically a 2-for-1 because it provides you a creature and it gets you a land, and in most cases a land you probably really want if it's your splash color. And it doesn't have the worst stats as a 3-mana 2-2. I mean, those aren't good, but it's not horrendous. Like, they could have made this a 1-3 or something, which would certainly be worse, but it would still be a pretty good card. I think all 3 of these green cards are worth first picking. You know, 2 of them really enable a potential 3 or 4 color strategy, and Affectionate Indrik is just a nice little creature. Now we're going to move into the first guild we're going to look at, which is Dimir. Remember, for the guilds, I'm going to talk about my picks for the best uncommon and the best common in each of them. So I think the best common for Dimir is Artful Takedown. It's a removal spell that has the upside of also being able to tap a creature. So for 4 mana, you get to kill an X4 and tap a creature. That sometimes can really turn the tide depending on what the board is looking like, because it's going to allow you to get 2 blockers out of the way. You kill one and you tap the other, and that's going to feel pretty good. I think the best uncommon is Nightveil Predator. It does cost double of each. It's part of that cycle of somewhat prohibitive mana costs, but it comes with Flying, Death Touch, and Hexproof. Of course, Hexproof being the most notable. Even if this was just a Flying Death Touch, though, it might still be here as the best uncommon. It's just a great card, but the Hexproof is what really pushes it over the edge and pushes it into being absolutely first pickable, despite the fact that it has a prohibitive mana cost. I think both of these are first pickable. The Nightveil Predator to a greater extent. It's just going to represent the end of the game in so many games, especially if you can resolve it on turn 4. Next, let's look at Golgari. I think the best Golgari common is Undercity Uprising, which is not one I feel great about first picking, but it is a removal spell. Hopefully it allows you to kill one of their things and you get to keep your creature that fights alive, but it also leaves behind a board of Death Touch creatures, which is no minor upside when it's already attached to a removal spell. Suddenly it makes your whole board able to attack regardless of how big your opponent's blockers are, and I think that makes it a pretty nice card. The best uncommon is definitely first pickable and one of the better uncommons in the set, and that is Status and Statue, the split card. One side is just a really good combat trick, and the other side is a better Putrefy. If it was just the statue half, it would probably still be on here as the best uncommon for Golgari. With the status half, it gets a little bit better because it enables you to use it maybe in the early game if you're stuck on 3 or something and you just need to keep a creature alive or you're screwed. But most of the time, I think you just wait till you can cast Statue. Now let's look at Boros. I think the best Boros common is Sky Knight Legionnaire. It is a reprint from original Ravnica, but I think it's going to be even better in this set than it was in original Ravnica. It represents really aggressive stats. Obviously, it's good to have 2 keyword abilities when one's flying and one's haste and you're a 2-2. But it gets even better in a format with Mentor in it. One, because a creature with haste can sort of suddenly represent more than just the damage they have. They can represent 2 damage plus a little bit of damage from whatever mentors them. Additionally, a creature with flying is obviously a great place to put +1/+1 counters because it's evasive and it will start representing a much faster clock that is difficult to block. I don't think you want to first pick it, but I think it's going to be one of the core commons of any Boros deck. I think the best uncommon is another split card. In this case, it's actually very similar. One side is a good combat trick on Integrity. The other side is a worse Lightning Helix, but still a very good removal spell that can also hit the opponent in a pinch. Sort of like before, if it were just the intervention half, it would probably still be here as the best uncommon. In this case, I think adding Integrity is a little more relevant. Sometimes intervention won't actually be that good. Like if it's not killing your opponent and it can't kill a creature, sometimes Integrity is just going to be better. That's not going to be the norm, but that will happen. That's not going to happen so much with the other one. But yeah, I feel pretty great about first picking Integrity and Invention. Next, let's look at the Izzet. I think the best Izzet common is probably Goblin Electromancer. I could see putting Hypothesizzle here, if that's what you're saying, but I think Goblin Electromancer is so central to what this deck wants to do that it's going to be a really core common for the deck. Decreasing the cost of instants and sorcery spells is always good, but when you add it in a format that has Jumpstart, it gets even better because you're going to be casting even more than normal instant and sorcery spells thanks to the jumpstart mechanic, which is completely concentrated in the blue-red color pair, of course. I don't think you want to first pick it. It's kind of like the Legionnaire. It's like a core common for the deck that really represents what it wants to do, but I don't think you take it with a first pick. I think the best Izzet uncommon is League Guild Mage. It's the only Guild Mage that's going to make these lists, by the way. All the Guild Mages are pretty good. I'm not trying to bash the others. I just think this one is the best because even if you don't end up in a deck that really does whatever this guild wants to do, which is like usually to cast instant or sorcery spells, and it can copy those, it's still basically Azure Mage, which was a great card back when we saw it. Has decent stats to begin with, so does the Electromancer, actually. But just being able to represent a mana sink that draws you an extra card every turn in like a worst-case scenario is a pretty good worst-case scenario. And I think you feel all right about first picking League Guild Mage. I think maybe Izzet in terms of commons and uncommons, in terms of the best of them, at the ceiling of them, and maybe the worst of all the guilds. But they have a lot of high-quality cards in general in addition to these. Next, let's look at Selesnya. I think the best Selesnya common is Samala Woodshaper, which represents a 2-for-1 in most cases. It's almost always going to hit you something off the top of your library, and then it's a 2-1 who can trade with a lot of things. Could get interesting too if you mentor it and suddenly it can trade for even more things, and it could kind of get out of control. Seems like a lot of fun to me. I don't feel great about the idea of first picking the Woodshaper, but I could see it happening, I think. I think the best Selesnya uncommon is Conclave Cavalier. The Cavalier is also really, really good, and so good that despite its prohibitive mana cost, it's worth first picking. 4 mana, 4/4 Vigilance that leaves behind 2/2/2s is nuts. It could easily be a 3-for-1, and any card that can be a 3-for-1 is a good card, basically. Okay, that's an exaggeration, but this one's a 3-for-1 without much effort. All right, so those are my picks for the best commons and uncommons in each color and in each guild within Guilds of Ravnica. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch more of my content, including draft and sealed videos in the near future of Guilds of Ravnica, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to make sure you get notifications every time I upload new content. Thanks for watching.